When it comes to animated movies, many will often say that when famous celebrities are cast in major roles, that it's only for publicity to generate more interest in the film, and that any voice actor could have played their part just as easily. And this is sometimes definitely proven to be the case, as those same celebrities will sometimes decline to reprise their roles in other mediums, and are replaced by voice actors who prove to do just as impeccable a job as they had. In other words, when it comes to animated movies, there are quite a few out there who feel that the cast doesn't really matter, and that as long as the voice matches the design of the character, any old voice actor could play the part. However, I, and I'm sure many others, don't agree. I believe that when it comes to animated films, casting can be a very important thing to get right, and sometimes even single-handedly makes a movie more watchable and entertaining than it has any right to be. And today, I would like to go over quite a few animated movies that I feel proves this exact point. But I would just like to note that while I'm going to try and avoid spoilers, one or two may end up slipping through. So in case you don't want anything ruined about a particular movie, you might just want to be a little careful. This will be your only spoiler warning. Okay, so to get right into it, I'd actually like to start off with a movie where it was a voice actor that was perfectly cast in a role rather than a celebrity in order to perfectly demonstrate my point here. And this would be for the direct-to-video sequel to The Little Mermaid, The Little Mermaid 2: Return to the Sea. Now on the whole, this movie is not well liked by fans of the original. It retreads the plot of the first movie, tells a discounted version of that story, and has the characters make some very questionable decisions in order for the story to play out the way it does. However, there is one aspect of this movie that's almost universally beloved, even by people who absolutely despise it. And that would actually be the main character herself, Melody, daughter of Ariel and Prince Eric. But what is it that makes her so beloved? At least on paper, she should come across as a carbon copy of Ariel at best, and a less likable version of her at worst. And what also doesn't help is that she's arguably stealing the spotlight from the characters everybody had come to love in the first movie. To put it simply, she had everything stacked against her, and yet she might just be the most iconic, beloved, and well-known character to come out of any of the usually subpar direct-to-video sequels. Now why is that? 2 words: Tara Strachan. A rather talented and well-known voice actress who's had her fair share of iconic roles, Strachan was originally brought on just to give the animators an idea of what Melody would sound like, but she ended up impressing them so much that she was actually cast in the part despite them initially wanting somebody more well-known. But Strachan wasn't just doing this for a paycheck, not by any means. She had been a huge fan of the original movie, and Jodie Benson, who voiced Ariel, was actually one of her idols growing up. So she wasn't just applying her normal voice acting talents to this particular part. For Strachan, this was the role of a lifetime, and her enthusiasm really shows in her performance. In other words, Strachan almost single-handedly took a character that was pretty much destined to fail and turned her into the most beloved new character in the movie. All because she was just enjoying herself and loving the part she was given that much. It's like Strachan's love for the character is so prominent in her performance that it starts to rub off on the viewer, and they can't help but love her regardless of the movie she's actually in. I wouldn't even be surprised if her energy rubbed off on the animators as they were making the film, which would actually make sense, as the bouncy way Strawn reads the part definitely translates into the way she's animated. And not to mention, Strawn's enthusiasm goes a long way in making Melody look sympathetic and ensuring she's somebody the audience can root for when anybody else might have accidentally put her in a more bratty or unsympathetic light. Though, of course, she is helped along by some of the cast, mainly Jodie Benson, who once again gives it everything she has as Ariel, as well as Pat Carroll, who simply loved playing Ursula so much that the writers had no problem introducing a basically identical sister so they could have her in the movie and essentially play that part all over again. Seriously, look at the scene where Ariel and Morgana are both trying to persuade Melody to give them the Triton. It honestly feels like it belongs in a much better movie than the one surrounding it. And that mainly comes down to three actresses giving it their all and actually managing to sell the drama and stakes of the scene pretty well because of it. And to a lesser degree, there's also the scene where Ariel comforts Melody after Morgana's been defeated. It's actually a pretty touching moment thanks to Strawn and Benson's performances. Now sure, those scenes and their respective performances aren't enough to save the movie, but you have to admit they definitely make it a lot more watchable and even enjoyable to a slight degree, especially in the case of Tara Strachan as Melody. But now let's take a look at something a little different. For example, in 1986, the animation side of things at Disney was on the brink, with many speculating that they would close it down completely. But then, The Great Mouse Detective was released, and was successful enough to renew faith in the brand and kick off the Disney Renaissance a few years later. And what was a major draw of the movie for a lot of people? Vincent Price voicing a Disney villain. I mean, Price goes completely over the top and chews the scenery so hard there's nothing left as Professor Ratigan, and it's absolutely glorious to behold. You can tell that Price is loving every moment of voicing him, and it easily makes him the most entertaining character in the entire movie. And even today, even if The Great Mouse Detective is considered a pretty good movie in its own right, the reason most people sit down and watch it is because of Vincent Price. To put it simply, somebody else may have been able to voice Ratigan pretty well, but nobody could have ever done what Price did with the role, both in and outside of the movie. And it's a very similar story with The Rescuers Down Under, another Disney movie that's considered underrated and good in its own right. Who's the first character that comes to mind when it's brought up? I guarantee you that 9 out of 10 of you thought of McClee. I mean, sure, Eva Gabor and Bob Newhart are definitely highlights of both films, and their performances in them shouldn't be overlooked. In fact, I would even say that in the first one in particular, it was their performances that made the movie in a way nobody else could have. But getting back to the sequel, McClee could have easily ended up just being a generic, memorable, and boring poacher for Cody to go up against. But George C. Scott as a hunter who hates intelligence, kids, and his own animal henchmen? Honestly, the casting couldn't have been more dead on. The normally seasoned and somewhat reserved actor takes his performance to levels not seen since Doctor Strangelove and is completely shameless in his over-the-top evil nature, chewing the scenery in ways that would make Vincent Price really proud. It's a performance one honestly might not expect from him, but it may just be one of his best roles from his later career. Seriously, if anybody but Scott had been cast in the role of McLee, he wouldn't be nearly as fun to watch, I'm telling you. Just listen to the way he's like, I just gotta promise that boy what he wants and then not give it to him. It's overly evil, it's extremely hammy, and it's absolutely hilarious. Scott knew exactly what kind of movie he was in, and it's only a shame that his performance in it isn't more well remembered. And even take something like The Jungle Book. Considered an animated classic and noted for being the last movie Walt Disney himself personally worked on, this movie has nonetheless received some slight criticism, both for being light on plot and for its depiction of Mowgli as a bit of a brat. And yet, there are still many people out there who love it regardless of that. And why is that? Well, not only for its cast of colorful characters, but for the actors behind them as well. I mean, Phil Harris as Baloo, Sterling Holloway as Kaa, Louis Prima as King Louie, and George frickin' Sanders as the absolutely terrifying Shere Khan. Is it any wonder to you why Walt Disney knew that this movie didn't need a tight plot and would get by on its characters alone? There are so many actors cast so perfectly in their parts that in any other movie they would have easily stolen the entire thing, but in this movie are simply able to hold their own against each other. But seriously, nobody can honestly say that anyone but George Sanders would have been able to bring that same level of gravitas and sheer menace to Shere Khan. His calm yet deadly demeanor, his classy yet animalistic voice, and finally his pseudo-civility giving way to a horrible and impatient temper. It's no wonder Sanders proved to be the standard for quite a few other villainous big cats with British accents to live up to in later Disney movies. To put it simply, any other actor could have read his lines, but only Sanders could truly make him what he needed to be on screen, to the point that even the incomparable Tony Jay couldn't quite live up to his performance in the sequel. And the exact same goes for Hades in Hercules. Now, personally, I believe Hercules himself is a pretty good character, but putting that aside, who is it that most people think of when this movie is mentioned? Let's face it, James Woods completely steals the movie as the Lord of the Dead, in a performance that famously has had many in stitches and left plenty coming back for more simply to get a second taste of everything Woods brought to the role. And it's really telling that Woods has agreed to reprise his role in everything where he has a speaking part and has even called him, hands down, his favorite of all the parts he's played. Once again, to many people, James Woods simply is Hades, and any other person in the part would never be able to live up to his pitch-perfect performance. It doesn't matter that he's famous. It doesn't matter what he does in his spare time. The only thing that's important is that he made the role his own in a way that only he could. And the result is what many will easily say is one of the funniest villains in Disney history. Just like with George Sanders, anybody else could read his lines, but only James Woods can truly make him the Hades so many know and love. Now, whether you think all of the examples I've just listed are exceptions, or that this wasn't even something that needed to be addressed in the first place, there's no denying that when it comes to animated movies, casting does matter, even if only some of the time. And I really only just scratched the surface of what I could have brought up in this video. Beauty and the Beast, Toy Story, The Lion King. I could honestly go on for days if I wanted to. But rather than doing that, I'll instead just bring up one example of what happens when you do replace somebody in a role that the actor had made all their own. Because you notice that Aladdin and the King of Thieves is considered one of the best direct-to-video sequels Disney ever made, and that it was the only time Robin Williams reprised his role as the genie. Now, Dan Castellaneta is an extremely talented voice actor that's effortlessly brought one of the most iconic characters in TV history to life. But he simply isn't Robin Williams. He can mimic his voice, his mannerisms, and even his energy to an extent, but he can just never be Robin Williams, and the character always felt wrong without him. It doesn't matter who replaced him in the part. If Williams himself wasn't voicing him, then the character just didn't feel right. Now, some might argue that Will Smith actually managed to get around this in the live-action remake, which is probably true, but that was only by doing a completely different take on the character, and that he wasn't in any way trying to channel Williams. And even then, would anybody say he surpassed him? Simply put, the genie, especially in animation, is the perfect example of why you don't try to have somebody else take over a role that was already perfectly cast. And you notice that after Return of Jafar, who seemed to become a new favorite among many people? Iago, who was just as synonymous with his voice actor, Gilbert Gottfried, as the genie was with Robin Williams. The only difference was, with only the one aforementioned exception, Godfrey stayed with the part and got to steal the spotlight as a result. And you notice how missed he was in the live-action remake? Really, all of this just proves that sometimes not only is casting important, but that there's no replacing the perfect match between a character and their voice actor, whether they're famous or not. Alright, I think I've proven my point well enough with this. So now I'd like to hear your thoughts. Do you believe that casting in animated movies is a lot more important than it's often given credit for? Or do you still believe it's not all that important and that I was exaggerating everything I've brought up? Please feel free to tell me in the comments below. And remember, you don't have to agree with this video just because you watched it. You can feel however you want about any topic we discuss here, and are most definitely entitled to your own opinion. And thank you all for watching. I really appreciate all of it. And I hope to see you all next time.